All right, I think we're good. Welcome to State of Play on Mint Press News, a bi-weekly editorial news show that presents breaking news from an alternative data set, let's just say one that isn't informed by corporate media interests. And those corporate interests are a big part of tonight's episode as we discuss the far-right anti-immigrant riots in the UK this past weekend and how they've been reported by the press. We're also going to discuss the current escalating tensions in the Middle East following the targeted assassination of Ismail Haniyeh and how Western powers are actually trying to de-escalate the situation because, for many reasons, the Western public or the Western polity as a citizenry, not just the Western militaries, are not prepared for a major war. What you're rioting over food and gas prices, just wait until Iran shuts down the Strait of Hormuz, through which 1/5 of the world's oil passes through. So I just want to make these two issues the main focus of tonight's episode because they are intertwined, and a case study on the ravages of the working class and the global south that is brought on essentially by late stage capitalism and the failure of the neoliberal world order. But first, when it comes to war, we have to look at corporate interests and what's happening in the heart of empire. So, if you guys weren't tracking, we're going to get into the riots that happened in the UK this week. I'm going to play some B-roll as we kind of talk about this. So, basically, according to a report by Oxfam in January, the world's 5 richest men have more than doubled their fortunes from 405 billion to 869 billion since 2020 at a rate of $14 million per hour, while nearly 5 billion people have been made poorer, reveals, again, an Oxfam report on the inequality in global corporate power. If current trends continue, the world will have its first trillionaire within a decade, but poverty won't be eradicated for another 229 years. So we're witnessing the beginning of a decade of division, with billions of people shouldering the economic shockwaves of pandemic, inflation, perpetual war, while billionaires' fortunes boom. This inequality is no accident, right? The billionaire class is ensuring corporations deliver more wealth to them at the expense of everybody else. So, runaway corporate and monopoly power is an inequality generating machine through squeezing workers, dodging tax, privatizing the state, and spurring climate breakdown. Corporations are funneling endless wealth to their ultra rich owners, but they're also funneling power, which undermines our democracies, which is why everyone thinks our democracies aren't working, and our rights. No corporation or individual should have this much power over our economies and lives. And to be clear, nobody should have $1 billion. That's just a personal opinion. So Hassan says UK rioters blame random Muslim immigrants. Oh yeah, we're going to get all into this. So while these rioters, these far-right white nationalist rioters, struggle to make ends meet, while they lose a significant amount of their paycheck to taxes, Coca-Cola, it was just determined, owes $6 billion to the IRS, says a recent ruling by the U.S. tax court. Doubt anyone will go to jail for that, though. It's just a fun example. But yeah, it's just poor immigrants and refugees fleeing from, for the most part, wars, coups, economic sanctions, and political instability brought about by Western imperialism. Underpaid, underhoused immigrant workers, some of whom are undocumented and therefore work without state mandated benefits, whose costs are actually generally borne by the employer, are the reason for the working class is broke and food and energy insecure, right? It's the immigrants. So it's not the top 1% of the capitalist class that own more wealth than the entirety of the working class in a place like America or Britain. It's Guatemalans fleeing death squads born out of U.S. interventionism, right? But we're going to look at Britain tonight because it's a great case study in the socioeconomic polarization that will continue to deepen and become more violent as the fabric of Western empire continues to fray and Western citizens fail to understand the root cause of the majority of their woes. Because to question the current incarnation of late stage capitalism, well, what are you, huh? You a communist? You a pinko commie bastard? You dirty little red? do not question, okay, guys? Do not question your neo-feudal overlords. And remember to tip your landlord, okay? They provide you with housing. And also, the police are there for your protection, and trickle-down economics actually works. So feel free to post other lies that propaganda has taught us in the comments section so we can make fun of them during the Q&A section at the end of the show. So speaking of corporate power, before we get into the riots in England, here's our Patreon plug. All right, Mint Press is an independent newsroom and doesn't have any corporate sponsors. We've been banned from PayPal. Fundraisers have been taken down by GoFundMe and demonetized on YouTube. If you'd like to support this brand of independent journalism, consider dropping your Economist subscription, which also kind of blames immigrants for, anything to not blame empire, right? And slinging $5 a month this way, it really does go a long way to support independent watchdog journalism. If not, I get it. We are, after all, being nickeled and dimed to death. So, sorry, my phone just started playing that. We're just glad you're here. So before we get into the Iran-Israel bit, what actually did happen this weekend? Well, let's go to TRT, the Turkish English language station. That's generally pretty darn good.
It was the moment a group of far-right protesters charged on a hotel in the northern English city of Rotherham. Asylum seekers are currently staying inside the building, and the message from rioters is loud and clear. Some managed to break into the building, as terrified guests watch on from what was unfolding underneath them. In the northeastern city Middlesbrough, similar but smaller riots have taken place as protesters face off with police. But it didn't stop angry mobs from setting objects alight, including bins. The 4 days of violence is causing concern for Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
I utterly condemn the far-right thuggery we've seen this weekend.
Okay, so if you're a right-wing fascist and you engage in violence, like abject violence and looting, and actually injure police officers, it's thuggery. But when you peacefully protest against the war machine, you're a terrorist. Just wanted to make that slight observation, the different nuances and semantics of language used to apply to white supremacists and everybody protesting the war machine.
Be in no doubt, those that have participated in this violence will face the full force of the law.
The riots were sparked after a 17-year-old boy stabbed and killed 3 girls taking part in a dance class in Southport, a town close to Liverpool. But disinformation quickly spread online over the identity of the attacker, with people on social media claiming he was a Muslim who had immigrated to the UK last year.
This was not true at all. Let's see if they cover it. If not, I'll fill in the details.
That caused riots in the town from the far right, which included an attack on a mosque. The violence forced the judge to name the attacker as Axel Rudakubana, whose family were part of the local church. The UK normally doesn't name suspects under the age of 18. But that hasn't stopped the rioting. On Sunday, another northern city, Hull, was cleaning up the aftermath of far-right violence which took place on Saturday.
This is my community and it's the right thing to do. And it's showing a good example to our children that crime and violence is not a good way of getting a message across, but working together as a team.
I'm embarrassed before this morning, disgusted, and wanted to take some action, really, I suppose.
The violence has forced hundreds of mosques in the country to tighten up security. London has also announced an extra $37 million package to help them. But with people of colour being physically attacked in recent days, many in marginalised communities across the UK are feeling both scared and threatened.
Like, did you see that? Those freaking right-wing fascists just threw an entire chair at a wall of cops. Could you imagine, if they were doing that at the protests in Washington, D.C. on July 24th when Benjamin Netanyahu came to talk? So anyways, just going to leave it there. So, this Axel Rudakubana first appeared at the Liverpool Magistrates Court over Monday's incident where he stabbed 3 girls to death and injured more. It the police have said at this stage that the attack was not terrorism related and that the suspect was born in Britain. Again, squashing speculation on his origins. But, by the time the misinformation got out on social media, they've already been primed to believe that, this is just what immigrants do. There's a threat from radical Islam. There are a bunch of jihadis. And not only they're taking your rights, they're here to kill your children. So, of course, this has all been debunked. But again, it doesn't matter with a group of people. So reactionary. So earlier today, excuse me, there was a COBRA meeting, which, are meetings that are named after the Cabinet Office Briefing Room at Whitehall. So it's an emergency response committee in the British government, get together of ministers, civil servants, the police, intelligence officers, and other officials appropriate to the situation they are looking into. And this is what Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of the UK, had to say after it.
COBRA meeting this morning, which was an opportunity that I took to thank the police for their work over the last few days, to express my support for the police officers who have been injured and the communities impacted by this mindless thuggery.
Again, not terrorism. It's just thuggery. It's just thuggery if you're not actively supporting an enemy of Western corporate and imperialist interests.
Of actions that
then you're just being a football hooligan. Sorry to our cousins across the pond. It really is soccer, though.
Came out of the meeting. The first is we will have a standing army of specialist officers, public duty officers, so that we'll have enough officers to deal with this where we need them.
Okay, so again, what I like about these governmental responses in late stage empire, it's like none of this will solve the underlying problem of wage, class, and economic inequality that is happening right now. So nothing's going to be done. All the government is going to do is put, quote, an army of cops, which were created as counterinsurgency forces to squash any opposition possible. And it's not going to solve anything. As this situation, as the economic realities of the everyday citizen keep getting worse and worse and potentially exacerbated by a regional war in the Middle East, they're going to need a whole lot more cops. And if you guys haven't noticed yet, cops don't solve problems. They generally create problems. And they're there for property protection I'm not going to get into that right now. But if you think cops are going to solve the problem and cracking down, time will tell. But, we have a strong enough grasp of history around here to know how that's going to work out. Let's continue, Keir.
The second is we'll ramp up criminal justice.
Okay, so the carceral system, they're going to imprison more people, put more cops on the ground, imprison more people. Again, nothing to address wage, job, inequality, but yeah.
There have already been hundreds of arrests. Some have appeared in court this morning. I've asked for early consideration of the earliest naming and identification of those involved in the process who will feel the full force of the law. And thirdly, I've been absolutely clear that the criminal law applies online as well as offline. And
so they're going to go after organizers. Okay, so as this continues to get worse and more dystopian, yes, they're responding to these protests, these far-right violent white supremacist protests more harshly because they were more violent than like pro-Palestine protests or just ceasefire protests, which is the most conservative position you can have because there's more violent, but it's going to set a precedent. So going forward, there's going to be more cops. There's going to be more prosecution of online organizing and stuff. It does set an unfortunate and dangerous precedent for how protests will go moving forward. Protests are becoming normalized. A couple right-wing Tory ministers have likened the protests that happened to BLM, which is laughable, seeing that BLM, Black Lives Matter, was a movement based off of fighting racial inequality in the police, the law enforcement, and criminal justice system. The fact that they're applying this to right-wing anti-immigrant anti-Muslim and Islamophobic white supremacists is actually laughable, but I wouldn't expect any nuance going forward. So yes, the only solution the state has at this time is now more cops, more incarcerations, and yes, nothing to fix the socioeconomic realities of the average working class person in England. So again, a lot of these people are already primed for white supremacy, for the ideas of replacement theory, which we'll go into. But yeah, this is literally going to solve nothing.
Assured that that's the approach that is being taken. Whatever the apparent motivation, this is not protest. It is pure violence. And we will not tolerate attacks on mosques or our Muslim communities.
Okay, well, now they're finally addressing it. Elon Musk, of course, posted on Twitter under Keir Starmer's address that said, why would we tolerate attacks on other communities? You know, it's like, dude, just chill, Elon. I know you're becoming a red pill incel, oligarchic fascist, but like, you don't need to make everything a cultural issue. And that's what they want to do. They want to, Elon Musk and his Twitter account is a great example of trying to create cultural issues, culture wars, instead of class wars. It's kind of almost like he bought Twitter just to do that, just to pump out his propaganda. I don't know. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but kind of makes sense to me. So I just wanted to say before going forward that asylum seekers in the UK account for around 6% of the British population, or sorry, 0.6% of the British population. And remember, the UK is one of the richest countries on earth. Around 10% of the population of the UK are non-EU immigrants, all who have a significantly higher barrier to employment than British citizens. This coerces many to work below the minimum wage with no benefits, which serves the capitalist class. They're not really taking your jobs in any significant way, but they have to do so because the corporate class doesn't want to pay you or them the fair price of their labor. I'm starting to sound like a Marxist, which I'm not, but like this is how we interpret class struggle, right? Also, they free trade, outsource labor to the global south, but yeah, it's totally the fault of immigrants, even though the corporations are outsourcing to places with cheaper labor. It's clear that neoliberalism, which is essentially market-oriented reform policies such as, quote, the elimination of price controls, deregulating capital markets, lowering trade barriers, and reducing, especially through privatization and austerity, state influence in the economy. It's one of the greatest sources of suffering, not the only one, but one of the greatest sources of suffering for the average citizen in the West. And I'm only focusing on the West for this particular issue because we're talking about white nationalism here and how white nationalism paints the foreign outsider or the perceived foreign outsider, even if they have citizenship, as the enemy. So instead of, it's race war, not culture war. So, this the West has, if you guys haven't noticed, systematically perpetuated a narrative that liberal economics, free trade, and deregulation will generate prosperity for all. This is like the cornerstone delusion of Reaganomics, like trickle down economics. You give the richest people all the money and they'll spend it, and it'll benefit all. The rising tide raises all ships. Of course, that's insane because, they continue to get more wealthy, and the wealthier they get, the less wealth there is for everybody else. So, the global institutions, such as the World Trade Organization, the EU, were established to impose this agenda globally through legislation. So, neoliberalism really has reduced barriers intended to protect local markets. This is why we have the deindustrialization in the West, as factories and labor were relocated to countries in the global South that had more favorable rates to exploit. We also have the privatization of national services, deregulation, which is premised on the notion that markets will regulate themselves. But in the end, a market that is dominated by the extreme few cannot regulate itself. So a lot of Cold War propaganda has told you that this is simply the natural way of things. And you accept it or be labeled a communist or a radical leftist or an anarchist, whatever. Anyone that doesn't toe the fascist line, right? Because late stage capitalism, if it doesn't really work out, it's going to go straight to fascism, right? So you accept it or be labeled a threat or an enemy of the state. I think authoritarian communism has its own problems, obviously, but we're just focusing on this part right now. And it's a very complicated topic. It's much easier, therefore, to mobilize white supremacy to hate the outside other and shut down critical thought. So just believe in the great replacement theory, man. People of color are trying to replace you. It's easier to understand that than neoliberalism, late-stage capitalism, and imperialism. And their anger and fear and confusion will only get worse as the economy gets worse. And it looks like it's only going to get worse, especially since, I brought it up in the beginning of this episode. The Strait of Hormuz looks increasingly likely to get shut down, which is what we're about to transition into talking to. And I'm literally trying to contend with the most insane news cycle ever regarding this Israel-Iran escalation. But there is also another lie that maybe someone put in the comments section. Wars are good for economies. It's like they're good for certain players. Yeah. But if you're struggling to buy food and petrol and gas and, there's a bad labor market, you're going to love when a country like the United States, which is already stretched thin economically, engages in a massive war of annihilation 7,000 miles from its territory. I'm sure that won't affect your global supply chain grocery costs at all. So, yeah. So I think, someone just wrote, the economy equals rich people. Yeah, because, people who aren't living paycheck to paycheck, which is not the majority of people right now, they don't have to worry so much about rising gas prices. They don't have to allocate $100 or £100 every month for emergency funds just in case their electricity bill is too much money. So again, these are all scary things to think about because it's like, oh my God, the system is so hardened against the average person, and the politicians are not that you've elected as representatives. They're not there to take care of you. And that's scary. What's less scary and easier to understand and easier to fight and riot against? It's not an entrenched system with a military and a counterinsurgency police force behind it. It's immigrants, the most societally vulnerable people in the country. So, that's, and I fear as this conflict in the Middle East escalates and all the bad imperialist decisions being made by Western powers in the Middle East is going to it always boomerangs back onto the citizens of the empire. So, of course, the people in the Middle East are going to get way more affected, horribly more so, if this thing pops off than anyone in the West. But it just goes to show that we're all connected by this web of infamy or whatever else you guys want to call it. So, Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of Britain, apparently has cut benefits for elderly peoples with winter heating. So, okay. That's just one thing I wanted to lay down. When we look at these geopolitical issues, they're kind of all connected. It really looks like Europe is disintegrating in real time. It's kind of wild to see. So the markets are tanking today. Christina has put that up. I'm going to do a quick commentary before we transition into the Iran escalation. The markets are tanking today, but that's not necessarily because of a imminent global conflict. They're over leveraged, and it was due for a plunge, and they're going to recover kind of quickly. That's what I've been hearing speaking with economists about the market plunge. So again, economists never agree. They're kind of like philosophers. in terms of like an academic principle. Like no one agrees on anything, but that's kind of a consensus that I've been exposed to in the past 24 hours. So, all right, guys. Well, now we're talking about discontentment in Europe, all suffering from empire. Well, let's check in with what's happening in Iran. So, first of all, a couple points that we need to go over that's happening right now. A lot of things have happened. So, first of all, a couple bullet points of breaking news that we all should pay attention to, because there's been some serious like diplomatic escalations, not military escalations, but one, like a senior ally, President Vladimir Putin, arrived in Tehran today for talks with Iranian leaders, including the president and top security officials, as the Islamic Republic kind of weighs its response to the killing of the Hamas leader, Ismail Haniyeh. And I'm not going to talk about like what I actually think happened with the assassination. I tend to think the New York Times said it was one thing. Iranian press, Iranian state media said it was one thing, but it doesn't, regardless, there's a massive, it doesn't matter. There was a massive security breach, and the performative effect is still the same. So Sergei Shoigu, the secretary of Russia's Security Council, was shown by Russia's, my Slavic pronunciation is so bad, guys. Sorry. It's Zvezda television station meeting Rear Admiral Ali Akbar Madian, a senior Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commander who serves as secretary to the Supreme National Security Council. This is a pretty bold move, you know, having these two officials meet in Iran, considering the timing of everything. So there is also an unconfirmed rumor that he's brought, Shoigu has brought 5 cargo planes worth of electronic warfare equipment with him to like jam guidance packages from like Israeli munitions. But that's just a Telegram rumor as of right now. I haven't seen anything of it, and I've been scrubbing the internet all day. So it's a really bold move to, while Russia's engaged in a proxy war in Ukraine and the U.S. is about to defend Iran with defensive strikes and interceptions against Iranian rockets and Hezbollah rockets coming into Israel, to have a security meeting in Iran right when Iran's saying, hey, within the next 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, it's going down. So that's a very conscious decision to make that diplomatic move right now, given the circumstances. So it's basically signaling in that they're gonna like double down and get in deeper with Iran with the security relationship. So this makes a lot more sense when Foreign Minister Lavrov said last month that any escalation or regional war with Iran would bring in global powers, and it should have been taken seriously. Well, you can see he wasn't kidding around, because Shoigu's there right now. So that's something that was a new development from today. Also, a few hours ago, Iraqi militias hit the Al-Assad air base in Iraq, the U.S. Al-Assad air base in Iraq, which is an escalation from Iran-affiliated resistance forces I did not expect. A major concern is that any of these militias in Iraq, that they'll go rogue from their Iran affiliations and force a U.S.-Iran escalation, as opposed to an Israel-Iran escalation, but a U.S.-Iran escalation that neither government seems to want. The U.S. and Iran, what they've done performatively since October is basically doing de-escalation games. One point of consideration here, though, is sorry, let me just pull this up so I can stop doing here. Y'all young kids can look at that thing while I continue to do a lot of exposition. Sorry. So one point of consideration here is the entire legality behind the U.S. bases in Iraq at this time. Because the last thing the U.S. needs, because they've been requested to leave by the Iraqi government, is to attract more attention to itself and the fact that they are about to be there illegally, as the bases in Iraq are another issue of contestation. They're already kicked out of Niger. Everybody is starting to become a trend to want U.S. bases out of their countries. And if people start thinking, because you do get a government does get a lot of benefits from having a U.S. base in their country. They have legitimacy, they have protection against their neighbors, they're a strategic ally, they get funding, they employ locals to work on the base, so that's jobs. But if they start becoming a liability, like having U.S. bases in your country may drag you into wars, you're going to see a drawing down of people wanting to be part of U.S. bases. So the U.S. probably won't respond to this rocket attack in any visible way. Special operations forces might be something that happens, but it'll be super low vis, and I don't think we'll hear about it if it happens, if anything happens at all. I'm not even sure what the damage was at this point. So, yeah. And so they're not going to want to make a big deal out of this. The United States Central Command, I don't think so. The last thing, and plus, if a war really does break out with Iran, I don't think Iran is going to actually target U.S. military assets. But if they do, the U.S. doesn't want to escalate for another reason, because the air defense systems could easily be overwhelmed. The U.S. air defense systems could easily be overwhelmed by Iranian ordnance if this thing actually pops off, because there aren't enough Patriot missile systems, and they don't have enough time to reload to stop an entire Iranian arsenal. So, and Iran also doesn't want to get bombed. Nobody wants to get. This is insane. I guess, the only people that want to bomb Iran are the war hawk neoconservatives in our respective Western governments, in conjunction with the white nationalists who just want to blow up Arab states and or Persian states and have no real conception of what that would do and how that would affect their own lives. But anyways, 3, the world has been functioning on like a world war economy for 2 years now. It's about to get a lot worse, right? The reports coming out of Iran and the Axis are very firm. They might not want to escalate with the U.S., but it looks like this retaliatory attack that's going to happen soon will be far more severe. Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, in case you're still not tracking that, has also changed his tune in a recent speech. Things are definitely escalating. He basically said word for word that Hezbollah is no longer a supportive front for Palestine, but that they will now be an entire new defensive front against Israel. This therefore raises the level by which Hezbollah will be dealing with Israel. This isn't about the U.S. and Palestine anymore. So one of the most significant things that we're reporting now, I think one of the news organizations that has the most connections on the ground with resistance fronts, that's in English at least, is going to be the Cradle. So let's pull that up real quick. I just decided to do that. So they're reporting, and they're usually pretty good about this. Resistance access a calculated simultaneous strike on Israel. So the West Asia stands on a knife's edge. Yeah. Okay, so according to them, retaliation is all but certain and could happen within hours, according to senior U.S. officials. A report yesterday by Axios claims that U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken informed his G7 counterparts that the response could begin as early as within the next 24 hours. That seems kind of quick for right now, but just yesterday, a member of the political Bureau of Ansar Allah emphasized that the response will not just come from Tehran. So I think it looks like they're going to try to again breach the Iron Dome, but do a coordinated strike between Yemen, Hezbollah, and Iran to all hit the Iron Dome at the same, and David Sling and the Arrow 2 all at the same time, overwhelm it, to show a couple of things, that they can, one, work in coordination with each other, overwhelm the Iron Dome system, hit a couple of important targets, but not like cause so much death and destruction that a war has to happen afterwards. So that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. Let's see. Oh, sorry, getting an ad. So although much has been said, I'm going to keep going through this article because it's good, has been said about the U.S. and its allies successfully thwarting Iran's response to the Israeli attack on its consulates last April. It is noteworthy that all targeted Israeli military bases were hit. during the Iranian retaliatory strikes. Okay, so one thing that we have to also mention with this Iranian response last time was that the United States and allies and NATO allies, including France, including the UK, also did intercepts, and they were getting targeting data for the missiles out of Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So Israel can't protect itself alone. It was estimated that up to 50 intercepts were done by NATO allies. So, I think what we're looking at is, again, another calculated response that's going to be more severe this time. And more people are going to start fleeing Israel when they see that, the Iron Dome can be easily overwhelmed and they are not safe. And if they have dual citizenship, they may go back to a different country. Yes. So I think better put, the demons running the British Empire created the mess over 100 years ago. Yeah. Also, Sykes-Picot wasn't great. There, you could just take it all out of a hat. So I think that's kind of what we're looking at now. A lot has been said about U.S. military assets in the region. Let me pull this back up. Where did it go? I don't know. Okay, sorry, guys. A lot has been said about U.S. military assets in the region. Another carrier strike group got moved to the area, and there's 4,000 Marines on the carrier. Well, there is something called an amphib. It's an amphibious assault ship that has Marines on it. They're already deployed with the strike group. So basically, when it comes to escalations and things I look for when I'm trying to assess whether or not the U.S. Department of Defense is serious about something, is what troops are there and what troops are being sent. So essentially, from my perspective, the Marines were already there. They're already attached to the carrier strike group. They basically exist for stabilizing operations. So if like a contingency plan has to happen, the fleet, the naval forces have to go on the ground, the Marines are going to run security for them. But 4,000 guys is not enough to take ground or take over a country. It's not even enough for a large scale combat operation. So that's not significant to me at all. And so some National Guard units might get deployed, but there's a difference between deploying National Guard units and active duty units. So active duty are the professional soldiers. That's all they do. National Guard, I have friends in the National Guard. I'm not talking trash, but they're called weekend warriors because they have their own jobs, they have their own lives, and every once in a while they'll get called up to go and deploy somewhere. So Operation how am I blanking on the frigging American anti-ISIS operation that's still going on in Syria? There's so many operations. They all bleed into one for me. Okay. But the guys in Syria, Jordan, are mostly National Guard units because diplomatically, when you deploy National Guard units, it means something different than deploying active duty combat soldiers. So when you deploy National Guard, it's just kind of like saying, business as usual. There's not necessarily an escalation going on. But when you deploy active duty units, their only job is to fight. So until I see active duty units leaving from ports and troop carriers or mass aircraft echelons, I am not too concerned about a huge escalation. So someone said, oh, was it called Operation Rubber Hose? Maybe. I don't know. I guess what they're doing is just noodling around. Oh, was it Operation Just Cause? I don't know. I don't really care. They can call it whatever they want. We still shouldn't be there. So, okay. So that's my whole shtick with what's going on in the Middle East. The carrier strike group, there's something called an Aegis defense system. It's kind of like an Iron Dome, but for ships, it's more sophisticated. Those will because they shoot intercept missiles from the actual naval vessels. So those will help with intercepting Iranian missiles headed towards Israel. Also, they have an aircraft carrier and a bunch of fighter aircraft. Fighter jets can also do intercepts. They can intercept missiles and shoot them down. So it's basically everything that I've seen, because there's, again, been no massive troop deployments. Just looks like they're just in a defensive posture. So, yeah, there are U.S. troops in Israel and Jordan. Okay, so yeah, guys, I think that is right now. I think we're continuously monitoring the situation. That's what we're looking at right now in terms of breaking news. Oh, it's Operation Inherent Resolve. Okay, sorry, I had to check my private messages. So, yeah, it's all looks defensive for right now. So I don't think. Basically, how these things work is, Israel does something, then Iran has to make a response, and then Iran makes a response, then Israel feels compelled to make a response. But there's always many days, or at least a few days, that pass in between these events. So, because what's happening is not just, it takes time to organize complex operations, plan them, implement them, disseminate orders, get all the pieces in place. There's also back channel diplomatic communications happening. And apparently it's been said that the United States has been struggling to establish diplomatic back channels on this with Iran, because they're going to third-party nations like Qatar or whoever else, to act as intermediaries. But apparently the water cooler talk is those other countries, or Iran, is not responding to those other countries, trying to act as third-party communicators. So yeah, there's a lot of diplomatic things going on as well. It's not just, they're responding to a military thing, like what's happening. Their military intelligence apparatus is kind of trying to determine what their military apparatus, then you have their civilian intelligence going on, then you have their diplomatic corps trying to talk to each other to kind of like de-escalate the thing. But it definitely seems like it's going forward. There will be a response. And they've basically talked it up too much. Iran just has to do it now. So we're not going to know what a U.S. response was going to look like until we see what the Iranian response is going to look like. But we do have a historical precedent. And that historical precedent since October is that the United States and Iran do not want a regional war. Netanyahu does, his far-right ministers do, certain neocons in Washington and Whitehall, the Lindsey Grahams and the Mike Pompeos and the idiot war hawks who don't have to go to war, they're totally just fine sending other people's children to war, are pushing that. But in general, the massive apparatus that is the United States State Department and Department of Defense and their counterparts in the Iranian government do not seem to want a massive escalation. Can things get out of hand? Yeah. I mean, we've seen how many, obviously they can get really out of hand. I don't mean to laugh, but what else are you going to do? Cry about it? Because it's so insane and stupid and senseless. Yeah, you could definitely do that. So I think that is what we're looking at. We started with the riots in the UK, the financial woes, the working class woes of the average white supremacist, blaming all their problems on the Middle East. And then, our media outlets use that pre-existing Islamophobia to manufacture consent for more wars, for more protection of Israel, for, more interventionism in the Middle East. Because the idea is, if we don't stop them there, they're coming for your kids, which is insane. It has no basis in fact or any sort of data set that I've ever been exposed to or my experience. So yeah, we're just going to have to wait and see. This news cycle has been insane. And the nature of this news cycle is so crazy, and the coming escalations are so unprecedented, and we're kind of in uncharted territory. This episode literally might be irrelevant in 30 minutes after we post it. Like, that's kind of what we're looking at right now, because it's 8 hours ahead from where I am right now. So it's 4:45 p.m. Central Time. So that's, oh my God, I'm so bad at math. What, like 4:45 a.m. in Cairo time, Tel Aviv time. Please don't math check me. I'm not a math guy. But that's a pretty good window. They still have a couple hours where something can seriously pop off. It's usually like midnight, 3 a.m. in the morning, right before dawn. That's when a lot of big attacks generally happen operationally. So we still got a few hours to get through, and then if it doesn't happen tonight, well, push catastrophe to the right by 12 hours, and we'll see what happens Tuesday night, right? So, all right, guys, because there's a lot going on, let's do like a 15-minute Q&A instead of a 10-minute Q&A. So let me pull up the comments here. Let's see what we got. Greg, do you think this type of riot will spread to the USA and Canada? Well, half my family's British. I think I understand, the British hooliganism that exists within football clubs and stuff. It was just really football hooligan. Everything that was going on. That's my impression. I'm not sure if it will look the same in the United States. I think what's really going to happen and what's really going to pop off is if Kamala Harris wins. If she wins, which doesn't look impossible, certainly. Can you imagine what it's going to be like? You thought January 6th was bad. I completely think that there will be blood in the streets. Because all these white nationalists will feel hopeless because they're convinced that elections are stolen. And, that the deep state is not going to allow their Lord and Savior, Donald Trump, to save them. So what else is there beyond violent resistance? So I think that outrage in the United States will kind of transcend politics. And yes, I think people of color, if it gets bad enough, will obviously be targeted. Yeah, I mean, I'm not very hopeful about the future of Western citizens because they will never grasp, again, why this is happening. They think it's terrorists in the Middle East. They think it's terrorists abroad or illegal aliens bringing in drugs, creating sexual violence, murdering people. And that's why they can't get work, and that's why they're not safe. It's not because we live in an increasingly entrenched police and surveillance state where there's a disappearance of the middle class and a massive wealth and power disparity between the people and the top 1%. They'll never understand that. I have very little faith that they will. So it's only going to get worse. Canada, people in Canada are generally more reasonable in some ways than Americans, but y'all have your own violent idiots too. So I think it's coming for us all here in the heart of empire. Yes. Once again, the stock market is not the economy. Yeah. Okay. So is there any estimation of how many Israelis left Israel? So this is hard to judge, okay? Because it was really bad PR in December when they said like 500,000 Israeli citizens had left Israel. Ever since that story broke in early December, they have stopped publishing internal reporting that their government is keeping track of. So we don't have a good count. There's estimates. I haven't seen any estimates because I just assume it's a lot. But people track outgoing flights and incoming flights and seeing if they're booked or not. I haven't seen an aggregate or any data on that, but someone out there is tracking it. I'm just not. But it's probably significant. It's probably not great. And we see videos every day of Ben Gurion International Airport, the outgoing flights being stocked full, like massive lines to get in through security and customs. I think, yeah, we'll see. Do you think Israel is psycho enough to invoke the Samson option? All right, so Samson option. Basically, if Israel is going to be defeated, they will just start slinging nukes everywhere. And it's a bluster deterrence policy that basically says, if you beat us and we feel like we're going to be annihilated, we're going to nuke you and we're going to nuke everybody. It's what allows them to be the bullies in the region the way they are, because of this this horrendous threat that they can launch. It's estimated they have about 40 nuclear weapons. That's one of the reasons that the far right in Israel, and what is the far right? Most of Israel at this point want a war of annihilation against Iran. They want the United States in on it to do it for them because they can't defeat Iran. But they fear Iran getting nuclear weapons, not necessarily because they think that Iran will use the nuclear weapons on them. There are definitely a lot of people who do, but that's not how Iran operates. The reason that a lot of savvy politicians in Israel fear a nuclear Iran is because they would not be able to act regionally with the same impunity if Iran could be like, yeah, okay, buddy, we have nukes too. All right. So that is a huge threat to their regional impunity. And you know what happens when you tell a narcissist no, they freak out. So yeah. The Samson option, it's almost too insane to contemplate, you know. The theory of mutually assured destruction still holds strong, I think, but who knows? I thought they would. I said in February, I thought there'd be a ceasefire in March because I thought they'd want to not be a complete pariah state in a number of years, and they would like to protect their long-term political viability. I was definitely wrong. And since then, I've kind of stopped making predictions like, no, they would never do that. That's crazy. So I basically now just stick to what I think is the rational course of action, and then leave room for them to be irrational. With the Samson option, it's tough. It's just so insane. But you know, they do act rogue, and they go rogue all the time. I do believe U.S. officials when they say that they had no idea that Israel was going to take out Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. Because guess what? The U.S. wants a ceasefire. The CIA wants a ceasefire. William Burns, the director of the CIA, who is not really a spy master, he's a diplomat, wants a ceasefire. And if the CIA got wind of it, they probably would have tried to quash it. Because, again, the U.S. has other interests that they need to be worrying about right now from their imperialist standpoint, like a geostrategic shift to East Asia, the failing war in Ukraine. There's a bunch of other stuff going on in Africa that they can't afford to be focused on this one issue. So they want a ceasefire. And Ismail Haniyeh was the most prominent voice, the most powerful prominent voice, at least, in Hamas, in the Hamas's political wing that was pushing for a ceasefire. Yahya Sinwar, everything that we've seen from him, it seems like he will be way more difficult as the most powerful broker now in Hamas to actually reach a ceasefire deal. So, yeah, it's just mad that they sabotaged it. Israel sabotaged it. They didn't tell the United States about it because the United States would push back because it's not in the U.S. interest to keep this going. And yeah, so they've been a rogue actor, and they'll continue to be a rogue actor. Will Samson happen? Knock on wood. I think my desk is wood. I hope it's the real stuff. So, let's see. U.S. personnel injured in an attack on the base in Iraq. Reuters reporting just now. I haven't seen that article. I did see something about them being wounded or injured or being killed. Sorry, being killed. But, you know, I've known a couple guys who were killed during training exercises. Equipment malfunctions actually do happen. The timing's super weird. They could have been killed in like a combat operation, but these weren't special operations forces. Like, there's usually not a lot of secrecy around what's going on. So maybe there was some shady stuff going on. Maybe they were killed in combat, but until I see something about this, hang on, let me pull this up real quick. Breaking news. Sorry. Okay, sorry, reading this. So base personnel are conducting a post-attack damage assessment. 2 Katyusha rockets Monday were fired at the U.S. base. Okay, getting ready to launch drones. Yeah, so maybe my producer didn't pull up the correct article, but I haven't seen anything where the U.S. government has said completely. Usually, when people die, my experience with combat casualties in the war in Afghanistan when I was over there, like when someone died or someone was even wounded, all communications on base would shut down. So, like, if you wanted to go use like the internet or something, you couldn't. They turn off the internet. They turn off phone lines because they will not turn anything back on until the family is contacted, no matter what. Like press won't know. We don't know. So, and that's sometimes I've seen that take like 36 hours because like one of their parents may be like working or like on vacation somewhere, or maybe a long haul trucker in one of my friends' cases, and they couldn't freaking find him for like ever. And so communications were shut down. There was no press statement until the families are notified. That's typical US procedure. So keeping that in mind, I'm not going to make any snap judgments because that's just how it works, even if people are wounded. So, yeah, there's not going to be anything until the actual family members of the soldiers are notified. And I don't think they've changed procedure since the Afghan war, which is only a few years ago. So what else we got, folks? We have 4 more minutes. Okay. Start. Okay. 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 How can the genocide and violence against Palestinians go on? Who has the power to stop it? Well, it's not really. Okay, real quick. I just saw this comment. I'll get back to that in 1 second. Who wins the award for the greatest genocidal state in history? Dude, it's either the United States or Belgium. Like, I may be missing something crazy, but the Congo was gnarly, and how the West was won was gnarly. Okay, so how can the genocide and violence against Palestinians go on? Who has the power to stop it? Well, first of all, did y'all see the CNN report today citing the Combat Institute and like the Institute for the Study of War, saying that only 3 out of the 24 Hamas battalions are actually destroyed, but there's still like 21 left, and they're actively recruiting, and they're still able to fight. So after almost like we're getting close to a year now of fighting in Gaza, they've only actually destroyed 3 out of the 24. They can't keep this going forever. And when you ask like who has the power to stop it, it's a combination of the resistance, international pressure, and economic pressure. The bottom line is Israel cannot win militarily. The only reason that the way they can win is to do a protracted years-long siege of Gaza and literally kill everybody in Gaza. And Smotrich, the far-right minister, said today that they have to give humanitarian aid because Israel cannot do a genocide. They're facing too much pressure. So even they know they can't do it. So they're in an impossible situation. They've already lost. They're just going to keep this going. So it's going to stop eventually. And then UN investigators are going to go in there, and every horrible thing we've seen is just the tip of the iceberg of what's actually happened. So, all right, guys, that's the end of my time. I got to go hop on something else. I hope you enjoyed the episode tonight talking about fascism in the empire and war, senseless war abroad. And yeah, hope to see you guys next time. I think we may try to cover the incredibly controversial Venezuelan elections in a completely new way. That's my coverage. So we'll get into that freaking can of worms and try to do the best we possibly can. Or if war starts, we're going to stick with war, So hopefully that doesn't happen. Enjoy the rest of the week, y'all, and we will see you on Thursday. All right. Have a good night, y'all.